Revelation by Karen Travis brought with it the return of a character from the Bantam era that I honestly never thought we would see again. After terrorizing the galaxy in Kevin J. Anderson's The Jedi Academy trilogy, as well as his novel Darksaber, Admiral Daala retired from her chaotic empire after rediscovering her former lover Legaeus Vorn at the end of Planet of Twilight by Barbara Hambly. And that was the last we saw or heard of her until now. Apparently Vorn is now dead, she wants revenge against the Moffs who tried to assassinate her, and Admiral Pellaeon calls her in as his backup plan. Weirdly enough, she also seems to know Boba Fett, but everyone seems to know Fett in this series, so I'll let that slide. So as with Inferno and Fury, I'm pretty much wading into the unknown here with Revelation, as I have tried to minimize spoilers going up to this point because I do want to be surprised by what happens. So, a brief summary. During this savage civil war, all attempts to end Jacen Solo's tyranny have failed. So his sister, Jaina Solo, decides that she needs to learn new skills from a very unlikely source. Meanwhile, Ben Skywalker is still convinced that Jacen killed his mother and undertakes an investigation to prove that he did it and how. And as Luke Skywalker contemplates unthinkable strategies to dethrone his nephew, this civil war only continues to escalate further. So as you sort of guessed from the summary, there's some distinct plot threads going on here. The first, of course, is Jaina deciding that she needs Boba Fett to teach her how to defeat her brother, traveling to Mandalore and learning from Boba, but mainly more from Goran Bevan. We have all of Boba Fett's family drama in that he found that his ex-wife was frozen in carbonite, and so they unfroze her, and his granddaughter wants to get married, and Mandalore, blah 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 blah. Ben teams up with Captain Shevu to investigate his mother's murder, and finds some shocking evidence to prove Jacen's involvement in it. Luke is secretly communicating with Jacen's co-chief of state, Niathal, to try to hopefully capture Jacen, or if worse comes to worse, take him out. After being approached by the Galactic Alliance in the form of Jacen and Tahiri, the Imperial Remnant decides to throw in their lot because they've been promised some star systems. And Admiral Pellaeon doesn't feel good about Jacen here, so he calls in his secret reserves, aka Daala. And finally, over on the evil front, Jacen is trying to train up Tahiri to be his Sith apprentice. He continues to just believe that everything he does is right. And while he's lost some support within the Galactic Alliance after he killed that lieutenant at the end of Fury, he hasn't lost all of his supporters. So let's start with Jaina first, and by extension, all the Mandalorians that she comes into contact with. The initial reasoning for Jaina going to Mandalore made some sense to me, in that Kyle Katarn took on Jacen and he wasn't able to defeat him. In fact, Jacen grievously wounded Kyle, so Jaina thinks that if she were to fight Jacen now, they're too evenly matched. She needs to learn new strategies that he won't see coming. But I will say that Boba Fett being her teacher did surprise me, although maybe it shouldn't have surprised me, knowing Travis's propensity for just bringing Mandalorians into everything because she loves them. And I mean, Fett is formidable, but I think my biggest problem here is just that he really doesn't teach her much of anything, and this entire plotline seems more devoted to having Jaina finally decide that if she has to kill Jacen, she has to kill Jacen, which is something that I thought she had come to terms with earlier in the books, but okay, fine. That's most of what happens here. Boba doesn't teach her a lot because he's sort of focused on his family drama. Goran Bevan teaches Jaina a little, but it's not really like fighting techniques. It's like, hey, as Mandalorians, we go berserker sometime, and then we're able to come out of it. And like, okay, I suppose I shouldn't have expected like a Karate Kid Empire Strikes Back training montage, but I'll get into it more in the later section. Just Jaina's time on Mandalore confused me a fair bit. And on the Mandalorian front, Boba Fett is going through a lot. Obviously, he's recalled all the Mandalorians back to Mandalore. They don't really want to get involved in this galactic civil war, but Daala does contact him with a job, and that's money, so they get somewhat involved here during the Battle of Fondor. But Boba's more concerned about what's going on with Sintas Vel, that they find her, she's frozen in carbonite, she's been frozen in carbonite for decades, so she's physically still 30 years old. They take her out, but she's blind and she has a fair bit of memory loss from just her years in carbonite. And he doesn't really want to tell her everything about her past. And more than anything, I came out of this book just feeling bad for Boba Fett. Like feeling not just pity, but just like, dude, you've really messed up your life. That maybe on the surface he's accomplished a lot, but he seems so incapable of connecting to people, connecting to his granddaughter, connecting to his ex, connecting to the people that look up to him, that I just felt so bad for him. But again, I felt like so much of the book was Boba and what he was going through that I think in the end, having now read the 3 Travis books in the Legacy of the Force series, that I might have preferred if the Boba stuff was like its own separate trilogy, because it feels really tangentially related to everything else that's going on around it. And maybe if the other authors had included Boba Fett, talked about Boba Fett, I would have felt that way. I did appreciate that in the previous book, in Fury, that Aaron Alston referenced him a few times, had Boba sending Han that Mandalorian armor, so at least getting you thinking about him again. But Fett's plotline is so divorced from this greater conflict that I do feel like shoving into Legacy of the Force somewhat does it an injustice, and I think that it would have worked better as its own story, and then Travis could have developed it more, because now with one book to go, I do get the sense that like each author has their favorites and they'll push them in the books, but then the other authors don't really write them, and so it doesn't feel as cohesive as it should. Like, Murda's getting married, but since we've only spent 3 books with Murda, her marriage sort of came out of nowhere in Sacrifice, that she's engaged to this other Mandalorian guy who she hadn't even known in Bloodlines. And so just, I think that if this had been a Boba Fett trilogy, like, this whole family stuff could have been fleshed out more, and I might have enjoyed it more because it had time to breathe and, like, its own complete books to work within. And so after book 5, in which Ben told his mom what was going on with Jacen, book 6, in which Ben was really mad about the death of his mother, thought it was Jacen, and wanted to kill Jacen, book 7, where Ben was sort of reconnecting with his dad, but not really in the story. We now come to book 8, where Ben is still convinced that it was Jacen, and he wants to get proof. So he teams up with Captain Shevu of the Galactic Alliance Guard, you know, the secret police. And they investigate, and they find evidence. They find hair with blood on it in Jacen's stealth X-Wing. And then Shevu goes and talks to Jacen and records it and actually gets Jacen saying that he killed Mara Jade Skywalker. And I get the sense that Travis really likes Ben as a character, but at the same time, I find the Ben playing cop aspect of the story a little weird. On the one hand, I guess it makes sense because he was made like an officer in the Galactic Alliance Guard. He knows Shevu. He actually was hiding out at his apartment for a while when he was avoiding his parents. But I wonder if it comes down to Travis's feelings about Jedi, that she'd rather write Ben as like this investigator rather than Ben as a Jedi in training. And I felt a little bit too like Ben's investigation somewhat got superseded by the Battle of Fondor because we're following along. They have the evidence. He looks at it, it's confirmed it's his mom's hair. He knows he has to talk to his dad and his aunt and uncle. And then it's like the Battle of Fondor, the Battle of Fondor, the Battle of Fondor. And I'm like, is he ever going to talk to them about it? And he did finally at the end. And I'm glad that now everyone is on the same page and they know that Jacen killed Mara. It just felt like it got dropped for this pivotal big battle and then pulled back up. And I think, again, I just feel a little bit like Ben's arc in the series, that the events are somewhat out of place. And I wonder if this is because maybe they shouldn't have killed Mara off in book 5. I mean, obviously, I would be cool if they never killed Mara off at all. But it just seemed like there were too many plot reasons why they couldn't find out that Jacen did it until now. But I just felt like the trajectory of Ben's emotions were somewhat out of order here. And I know that grief is a process, and you could go from anger to acceptance back to like, wait, no, but I want to prove it. But I think that if Mara hadn't died in book 5 but had died a little bit later, I wouldn't have this sense of like inertia and the Jedi aren't doing enough, because we wouldn't have to drag out the revelation of who her murderer was until now. And if you saw any of my shorts from Sacrifice, I was very confused why Mara didn't go Force Ghost, and so she is a Force Ghost here, but again, she doesn't say anything. I guess she's like, figure it out on your own, kid, but I'm like, you're a Force Ghost. You said, I love you, Ben. You can say, confirmed, Jacen, go after him with my blessing. Like, I don't even know, man. And I think, too, my disgruntled feeling about how the Jedi are approaching this also carries over to my feelings about Luke. And here, on the one hand, I'm glad that he is talking with Niathal, that, part of the Galactic Alliance and the Jedi are working together, that they both are like, yeah, Jacen is a problem that we need to eliminate. But it seems like there's so many opportunities in this book and then in other books where, like, they have the opportunity to go after Jacen and they're going after Jacen and then they just stop. Is this because I know that we're saving it all for a big battle between him and Jaina in book 9? Yeah, probably a little bit. But, like, Luke is there. Luke gives him this Falanasi illusion of all these ships. He's freaking out. Like, Luke could have eliminated him, but he doesn't. So then Jacen's like, I'm better than Luke. And I'm like, no, I think you just have plot armor at this point because you need to survive until book 9. I guess I'm glad that by book 6, the Jedi finally picked a side and stuck to it. It just feels like they're not doing enough. That there's almost like this feeling of, oh, but it's Jacen. We can't kill Jacen. And it's like, he murdered Mara, he's evil. You just get all the Jedi Masters together and do something. But also, I do think that grief somewhat comes into play here, and that definitely came into play into Inferno with how Luke approached a lot of things, so maybe I should let some of his actions slide. And Niathal, as the co-chief of state, 100% accepts now that, like, Jacen is out of control. For her, the tipping point seemed to be him killing the lieutenant at the end of Fury, but, girl, I mean, he's been a wackadoo for a while. But again, it seems like she's hesitant to take actual action against him until far into the Battle of Fondor, because it just seems like there are so many people who are scared of Jacen, or if not scared of him, scared of the consequences of if they were to remove him from power and what would happen next. She had a little thought at one point that maybe she had been manipulated into this whole thing, and I agree. I think that Lumaya used her ambitions to propel her to this point, and I'm not sure that, like, she's the best chief of state for the Galactic Alliance, but she's what they have right now. Admiral Pellaeon shows up. He is now 92 years old. He's probably gonna die any day now, but he's still in charge of the Imperial Remnant. And I always like when Pellaeon shows up, but he felt somewhat off here. And in thinking about it, I think that he just felt like too overtly manipulative for me. Whenever I think of Pellaeon, the first word that comes to mind is honor. Like, he is the honorable guy. Maybe it's his age, but he just seemed a little too, I don't think sassy is the right word, but just not himself. I guess I can accept him calling Daala because they did work together in Darksaber, but like Daala shows up and again he was like sort of weirdly flirty with her. It's just like never a sense I got from his character, but that's just me. And like Daala calls him by his first name, which I think is fine. They're both admirals. I don't know if she's still an admiral. She was an admiral, like sort of on even footing. But then Niathal repeatedly called him by his first name, and I just felt that was like disrespectful. Like he's almost an elder statesman at this point. It's the same as when in the Fourth Heretic trilogy that Luke called him by his first name, and I was like, excuse me, no, don't do that. Admiral Pellaeon to you. And so maybe somewhat that played into it too, where I felt like other characters treated him too casually, and that just, again, maybe me loving Admiral Pellaeon and wanting only the purest respect for him. And of course, when everything at Fondor goes bonkers, Niathal approached Fondor and said, hey, do you want to surrender? And they said, yes, I want to surrender, because Jacen was just killing civilians. And then Pellaeon's like, all right, they surrendered. We're going to not do anything. And that's when Tahiri Veila assassinates him, which was a terrible scene. Felt heartbreaking to read because she doesn't even stay while he's dying. She just leaves the room. And of course, in his dying moments, he calls for Daala and her fleet shows up and the tide of the battle changes. But at least he went out like holding firm to his standards, his principles. But oh man, so sad to see him go like that. So speaking of the evil ones here. Yeah, I thought in the previous books that the way Jacen treated Tahiri was like minion, that there was no way he was going to consider her a possible Sith apprentice because he just seemed too dismissive of her here. But I guess with the loss of Ben, he really needs an apprentice, and he's already spent all that time with Tahiri, taking her back to Anakin's death over and over again, so Tahiri is now his Sith apprentice. I've already shared my thoughts about Tahiri falling down this Darth path, how I just feel it's somewhat disrespectful of everything she went through the New Jedi Order series and how she triumphed over it. So I guess all I'll say about Tahiri here is that she just felt younger than she should be. People refer to her as the girl. Jacen says, like, you have to wear shoes. And, like, that's one thing that once she merged with her Rena personality, that, like, shoe thing wasn't really an aspect of her character anymore. She wore shoes. She was a different person. It's like they're treating her like a teen or like a new adult when, like, she's almost 30 at this point, I believe. She's, like, definitely in her late 20s. She's a grown adult. But the way she was portrayed and the way people talked about her just felt like making her younger than she actually is. And I think too the way it comes out that like Jacen doesn't know if she's naive, if she's like making a joke, or she doesn't get things, and like Tahiri's not naive, and she especially shouldn't be by this point in time. And then we've got Jacen, who just, I think it especially comes through that taped conversation with Captain Shevu, has rationalized everything that he's done. And in the Battle of Fondor, from the beginning, he wants to kill civilians. He wants to, like, bomb the surface. He wants to make an example of them so that no one else will do this. I guess when you become a Sith, you want to win at all costs, and concerns that would be something that normal people would worry about, killing civilians, have we gone too far? They just don't even bother him at this point. He justifies killing Mara because she attacked me first. He justifies killing pretty much everyone he's killed. It's like, well, I had to. And it's just so sad, like, the change in his character from everything up to now, that just he's irredeemable, it seems. Jaina, this is one of the things she struggles with, that like, oh, well, Luke saved Vader, and Murda says, don't kill your brother, can I save him? And then the conclusion she comes to is like, probably not. That this is something that has to be done, that you can't talk him down from this point. You can't make him stop through reason. And if you can't arrest him and hold him, he's just gotta be killed. So on to my issues with Revelation. My first is just that it took me longer than I expected to read this, and I think part of it was just there was a lot of stuff going on. My grandmother turned 100 years old. How exciting. But I think too, I would put it down, and then it wasn't like I felt drawn to pick it back up. Like I had to know what happened next. It was more like, oh yeah, and now I'll read a little more Revelation. So first, a minor quibble. Each chapter begins with an epigraph, and it's like communication between different people. Travis has done this before in Bloodlines. It was like a lot of news stories, which I felt did somewhat add to what was going on, seeing like this outside perspective on things. But here I felt like the epigraphs were just sort of useless, like not needed. Like we have Daala calling Boba Fett saying like, all right, you gotta go now. But we already had in the book itself Daala contacting Boba Fett and saying, hey, I need you here, and, you know, I might call you in at any time. So they just felt like pointless, I guess, in a way. My second issue was, Jaina being trained by Boba Fett on Mandalore, which just comes down to, like, what did she learn here? Did she learn anything that will help her take down her brother? Because she didn't really seem to learn any techniques. Bevan like demonstrated their berserker stuff for her, but it wasn't like she learned a new style of fighting, new moves or anything. She didn't learn how to use a new weapon. More than anything, it just seemed for her to be there and be like, oh, look at the Mandalorians. Oh, they sing, they farm, they fight. Oh, I feel bad about my family. Oh, I don't know what I'm gonna do about my brother. And then finally being like, well, if I have to, I have to. I'll go through with it. So it's just like, in the end, I almost felt like her time on Mandalore was pointless. Because I guess I'll see once I get to Invincible, she didn't really learn any moves or a fighting style or anything. So, like, how is this going to help her in her fight against her brother, other than she seems to have finally made her mind up that she needs to take him out? And then I guess didn't really talk about the characters section, so I'll talk about her in the issue section. But the return of Daala. So Daala in the Bantam era was just a chaotic non-planner. She seemed a little bit better in Darksaber. She was actually planning things out in advance, working towards an end, but the sense you get of Daala, especially from the Jedi Academy trilogy, is that she just does stuff, and then it doesn't always work out. I mean, she lost, like, almost all her Star Destroyers. She's not a great strategic mind. So Daala, you know, going off, retiring with her former lover, it seemed like, honestly, the best ending that she could possibly have. Because if she had just kept running around the galaxy, she would have died at some point. Because she's, like, not that great at being a leader or a planner or an admiral, unfortunately. So on the one hand, you know, this is decades later. Daala's mature. Daala could probably be better, but it was like the way Pellaeon talked about her, like, oh my gosh, Daala, the most amazing strategic mind. And I was like, are we remembering the same woman? Because she was just a bit too flies by the seat of her pants for that. And even then, she was flying by the seat of her pants and she wasn't very great at it. And then too, Pellaeon has some comment where he talks about, oh, if only we'd have a Moff like Daala, but we've never had a female Moff. And yeah, you have. I mean, there was the Moff in iJedi, although I don't think she was officially one. She just sort of made herself one after her husband died. But then there was one in the Force Heretic trilogy during the New Jedi Order. So, like, this isn't a new concept of female Moff. We've had them before. So, in short, I found Revelation a difficult read at time. Travis writes well, but I feel like her characterization of some of the characters felt off to me. And just Jaina's time on Mandalore, maybe it will make more sense in the next novel, but it just felt like this long, extended, needless part of the book that I had to slog through. The stuff with Boba Fett was interesting, but again, I think it would have worked better in its own separate trilogy rather than pushed into the Legacy of the Force books. But definitely things escalated a lot here. The Galactic Alliance is now splintered into Jacen's side, Niathal's side. Tahiri Veila assassinated Admiral Pellaeon, and the Empire seems like it will be somewhat of a mess for a while. And so it all comes down to Jaina's showdown with her brother in the next book. So next time I'll be reading the last book in the Legacy of the Force series, Invincible by Troy Denning. Do you like my creepy eyes? Oh my god. I look like a nut.